The Wild West has inspired countless pictures, films, stage plays, and literature, impacting the popular culture of the United States like no other time period in American history. Its greatest contribution to the lexicon of culture, however, might be the role it played in songwriting and the music industry at large. Songs, and more specifically folk songs, blues, and ballads, were heavily inspired by the times and tales of the Wild West and the frontier that expanded from coast to coast. One of the most notable music groups to hop on the frontier folk tune train was the Kingston Trio, a folk pop team of 3 musicians responsible for kickstarting the folk revival and popular American music of the 1950s and 1960s. The boom began in 1958 with the release of the Kingston Trio's biggest hit to date, a recording of the Appalachian murder ballad, Tom Dooley. Before long, Tom Dooley was number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100 charts, and by the end of the decade, had sold over 3 million copies across the country. What many listeners don't know beyond the colorful, storytelling lyrics and the warm, chambered tone of the trio's vocals was that the song was actually inspired by a headline murder and hanging back in 1868 in Statesville, North Carolina. To share more about the tragic backstory to one of the most notable folk pop ballads of all time, here's a deeper dive into the titular character of Tom Dooley and the impact it left on the frontier and beyond.
Hang down your head, Tom Dooley, hang down your head and cry. Hang down your head, Tom Dooley, poor boy, you're bound to die. Hang down your head, Tom Dooley, hang down your head and cry. Hang down your head, Tom Dooley, poor boy, you're bound to die.
The man whose namesake would lend itself to the eponymous hit single, One Thomas C. Dooley, was born on June 23, 1844, to a couple of poverty-stricken Appalachian farmers in the hill country region of Wilkes County, North Carolina. Dooley was one of 4 siblings, the youngest brother of 3, with a younger sister named Eliza. The Dooley children, while poor, weren't without an education and went to school alongside the foster family, namely the 3 young girls, Anne, Laura, and Pauline. Much of Dooley's youth was spent running around the hillsides of Wilkes County with Anne and her cousins. The legend goes that even at an early age, Dooley and Anne struck up a romantic relationship and were nearly inseparable, depending on the account given. In his spare time, when he wasn't caught up chasing girls, Dooley was a learned musician, known for playing the fiddle. And according to certain oral traditions, he was one of the finest banjo players in all of the hill country. These rumors continued into Dooley's next foray, when he enlisted in the Confederate Army on March 15, 1862, months shy of his 18th birthday. He was placed into Company K of the 42nd North Carolina Infantry Regiment. Other stories of Tom Dooley believe the young soldier had actually served alongside the infamous Colonel Zebulon Vance in the 26th Infantry. However, these newspaper puff pieces were based purely on speculation. There are no official military records that place Dooley anywhere close to the 26th. It's this detail that suggests the banjo lore can also be regarded as an example of myth-making. It was said that Dooley serenaded Colonel Vance with his expert banjo picking, joining the Army's little band to appease his noteworthy commander. Alas, these were not the only details of Dooley's life that would later be exposed as hyperbole. It's often retold that the soldier and soon-to-be murder suspect made it through all 4 years of the Civil War without as much as a scratch. In reality, Dooley is known to have suffered various injuries and ailments during his 4-year enlistment. He certainly wasn't invisible to trouble either, as he was captured and brought to a Union prison camp near the end of the war. Alongside him was another Wilkes County resident, an older fellow by the name of James Melton. Melton was a decorated soldier, having fought in the Battle of Gettysburg, and for a while, Dooley had looked up to him. Melton was neighbors to both the Dooley family and the aforementioned Fosters, and played a big role in his farming and cobbler business. Melton was also married to none other than Anne Felton herself. The couple had wed before he joined the Confederate Army, sometime in 1859. However, it's believed that Anne's marriage with Melton did not impact her frequent flings with Dooley. In reality, after the two neighboring prisoners of war were released from the Union camp and returned home to North Carolina, Dooley and the newly named Anne Melton struck up their romance as quickly as it had been extinguished. However, it wasn't long before the philanderer Tom Dooley grew bored with his current love life and struck up intimacy with the other foster woman, namely Anne's cousin Laura. The legend goes that within months, Laura discovered she was pregnant, and the realization forced her and Dooley to make plans to elope. It was their only hope to avoid the firestorm that would surely rain upon them by the unhappy townsfolk and their family members. Around the same time, gossip around Wilkes County suggested Anne Melton was none too pleased with her not-so-secret lover's affair with Laura. The gossip turned to outright suspicion when on May 25, 1866, Laura Foster departed her hill country home on horseback, only to be found dead in a clandestine grave less than a month later. Upon her disappearance, folks from in and around that Appalachian community worked with a frenzy trying to locate the poor young girl. It didn't take long before everyone realized she had been kidnapped. And of course, everyone's attention turned to Tom Dooley, the most likely culprit. Dooley didn't afford himself any benefit of the doubt either. After hearing a few locals pin Laura's vanishing on him, the young libertine fled to the residence of a relative, an elder also named Thomas Dooley. Thomas housed the boy before sending himself to Trade, Tennessee, a tiny mountain town just across the state border of North Carolina. Dooley hid out in the volunteer state for merely a week, operating under the alias of Tom Hall. He obtained work for the Confederate Colonel James Grayson, but the gig was short-lived after Grayson caught wind of the warrant out for Dooley's arrest. Unbeknownst to Dooley, Grayson carried out his own amateur sleuthing to learn of Tom Hall's true identity. Once he confirmed it was none other than the wanted Tom Dooley, he worked with the Wilkes County posse of lawmen to aid in arresting the accused kidnapper. Around the same time, in June of '86, a search party finally uncovered Laura Foster's resting place, digging her body up from her makeshift tomb. The discovery came as a result from a tip by none other than Anne Melton herself, who some had been growing equally suspicious of, considering her history with Dooley. Meanwhile, Laura's body was pulled from the shallow grave, her legs propped up in a crude manner. Immediately, the excavation team noticed a stab wound to her chest, the only injury they could find. Without a doubt, Laura Foster had been killed with a knife, and the killer was still at large. When Dooley returned to Wilkes County and the news that Laura's body had been found, he decided to accept responsibility for the murder. Some believe that deep down, he was inclined to believe Anne was the real killer, but was too in love with his old lover to put her life on the line. Thus, Dooley was officially arrested and set to trial for the murder of Laura Foster. He was represented in court by the aforementioned Zebulon Vance, future North Carolina governor, and the man many had falsely claimed to be Dooley's mentor in the army. These claims were born from the fact that Vance represented the boy pro bono, but in reality, Vance simply felt sympathetic for him. He would later make it known that every fiber in his body told him that Tom Dooley was innocent, which most likely fueled his passionate defense. One of Vance's first moves in the trial was petitioning for its move to Statesville, North Carolina, and out of Wilkesboro. He argued that Dooley would never come close to receiving a fair trial if they remained in his hometown, with most of his neighbors and notable townsfolk biased with rage and disgust towards the boy. The petition proved successful, and the trial was relocated. Prior to the trial, the widespread belief was that Anne Melton was the one who murdered Laura out of jealousy, and Dooley took the fall for her out of love. At the trial, however, the tune changed rather suddenly. Instead of Anne receiving a fair share of the accusations, the prosecution focused solely on Dooley and his supposed accomplice, a man named Jack Keaton. They brought in various witnesses who claimed to have overheard incriminating testimony delivered by Dooley himself. These witnesses believed that they had heard him say he was going to take care of whomever had given him syphilis, colloquially referred to as the pock over in 19th century hill country. Vance wouldn't fall for their gullible folly though, and called the local doctor to the stand to corroborate these reports. The Wilkesboro medic couldn't confirm these suspicions, seeing as though he had already treated both Tom Dooley and Ann Melton with the blue pill, both prior to Laura. On top of that, the doctor revealed the first person to be treated in Wilkes County was actually Pauline Foster, the third of the 3 foster girls. Upon this testimony, it was believed Pauline had actually given syphilis to Dooley, who then spread it to both Laura and Ann as a result of his promiscuous lifestyle. Eventually, Pauline Foster was brought on the stand to give her side of the story. Her biggest piece of testimony didn't involve the pock, however. Rather, she implicated Ann Melton even further, noting a trip that she and Ann took to the hillsides, where Ann was searching for the grave of Laura Foster to ensure it was still undetected. With such a damning statement entering evidence, Ann Melton was officially arraigned to stand trial alongside Dooley and Keaton. It was growing more and more likely that Ann had murdered her cousin in pure jealousy, refusing to watch Dooley often marry anyone but her, despite her own union with James Melton. Of course, with Dooley still at the center of the case, such a revelation would never see the light of day. He continued to absorb blow after blow during the trial, and when it came for a ruling, he was the only defendant found guilty. Keaton was dismissed, and Ann was acquitted. Colonel Vance wouldn't go down quite as easily, and appealed the court's decision. The appeal was granted for a new trial focusing squarely on Dooley and was underway before long. However, the new judge and jury wouldn't sway from their first opinion. When it was all said and done, Tom Dooley was convicted of murdering Laura Foster in cold blood. On May 1st, 1868, weeks before the 2-year anniversary of Laura's demise, Dooley was thrown into the gallows. Just before he hung his head, the Confederate soldier-turned-convict would make it known that deep down, he knew he was innocent. "Gentlemen, I did not harm a single hair on that fair lady's head," Dooley proclaimed. He was executed by hanging shortly thereafter. From the second Tom Dooley took his last breath, the mythology of his situation expanded beyond Wilkes County, North Carolina, and ran rampant across the frontier at large. The love triangle and subsequent crimes shocked all of Appalachia, a region very much not used to the grisly nature of calculated killings and the rumor mill of gossip and slander that infects otherwise sleepy backwoods locales. One major myth manufactured by the madness centered on Colonel Vance's relationship with the musically inclined Tom Dooley. People could not accept the notion that Vance defended Dooley pro bono without some sort of prior relationship, leading to the idea that Dooley not only fought in his company, but persuaded him with otherworldly banjo skills. These abilities were greatly exaggerated, as already noted. Dooley was known to play in the army band, but he's thought to have been a background fiddler or drummer rather than a banjo player. It's also shared amongst myth seekers in the Appalachian Hill Country that Dooley truly was innocent. One legend has it that Ann Melton arrived on her deathbed where she finally admitted to killing her cousin Laura Foster in the spring of 1866. Apparently, Ann was so caught up in her envy for Dooley, she stabbed Laura in the heart and pleaded for her former lover to help hide the body in the Wilkesboro hills. It's said that around the same time, Ann started hallucinating black cats clambering across her walls, as well as the sensory illusion of bacon frying somewhere in the room. The phantasmia lasted until she died in 1874 as a result of injuries from a horse-drawn carriage accident. The biggest impact the Tom Dooley case made was on the music industry and pop culture. Not long after the hanging of our titular convict, a poet named Thomas C. Land is thought to have written the first iteration of the song that would later famously become Tom Dooley. Land's early rendition of the iconic murder ballad was the first to spell Dooley's name as it's actually pronounced. In most corners of the United States, folks would read the name and say Tom Doola, but in the specific region of the Appalachian Hill Country, the local dialect makes words ending in pronounced with a hard E sound, hence Dooley becoming Dooley. Over the years, the lyrics would shift and be shaped to reflect various events and emotions elicited by the legendary court case. By the time the Kingston Trio reworked the ballad to fit their style of a folk pop revival, the song and story of Tom Dooley had entered the lexicon of pop culture, thanks to early efforts by newspapers such as the New York Times. The Kingston Trio took liberties with their version of the song, riffing on the myth that the man called Grayson in the legend was more of a serious adversary to Dooley, or even a jealous, romantic grudge holder who watched Dooley be hanged upon his capture. While it's true that Grayson in reality helped North Carolina lawmen extradite Dooley from Tennessee to North Carolina after hiring the boy, that was the only role he played in the case, and he did not harbor any long-standing bad will with Dooley. The ballad also makes no mention of Ann Melton, the other party in the Dooley-Foster love triangle. It's widely accepted she was the brains behind the operation. However, this omission can easily be correlated to the tragic nature of Dooley's unlucky position, whereas Anne escaped judgment. Nevertheless, the mythology of Tom Dooley and the cast of characters who played a part in his hill country exploits have been immortalized through both story and song. While the details may have been stretched and stuffed to heighten the folktale, the original tellings are just as terrific, if not tragic, examples of the power and influence frontier legends have, both on the past and present memories of the American yesteryear. And most of all, remember, next time your old lover catches you kindling a flame with her friends or family, you might as well cut to the chase and hang down your head, because poor boy, you're bound to die.